Ah! I was just doing the atonal screaming for you, Robert. What'd you think?
Now you fucked up the introduction, Sophie. It doesn't feel good now, does it? Feels bad.
Well
See,
done, Magpie.
It's harder than it sounds.
Thank
you know
what?
I'm hoping,
honestly, kind of fun.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that the listeners here will appreciate how much work goes into my atonal screeches, because to be polite, they sound a lot better than your atonal screeches. That's all I'm saying.
I absolutely agree. So give the listeners one.
No. I think they've gotten enough atonal screeches.
Okay.
Instead, let's talk about, I don't know. We're not on video this week, folks. I'm not feeling well. I just had a vasectomy, which,
brag.
You know, I debated on, because I don't like talking about my private life on the show too much, but I also think it's a good thing to encourage. So guys out there, if you're thinking about getting a vasectomy, if you're like, should I get a vasectomy? Go do it. Or do it yourself. You know, it doesn't look that hard.
Do that.
The doctor wasn't down there very long. You could figure it out. You know? Pruners? Sure. You know, whatever it takes. Rubber band. That's how we do it on the sheep. Anyway. Margaret Killjoy,
okay,
guest, how are you doing?
I'm good. I didn't have surgery this week.
That's also good. That's better than having surgery as a general rule.
I love that for you, Magpie.
I certainly prefer the weeks when I don't have surgery, even if it's minor surgery. It's never very fun. Margaret, how often do you think about the fact that at any given moment, we're at the most 30 minutes away from the entire planet being wiped out?
Well, I've been thinking about it more recently.
That was depressing.
God damn it.
Yeah, it's
I watched a movie about this recently, and it's
a lot of people have a lot, which is kind of why I haven't actually seen that movie yet. But this is always on my mind. It's a special the whole nuclear doomsday, planetary nuclear doomsday device that we largely co-created with Russia is on my mind a lot. I'm just interested in the facts of how it came together and who made it, and I'm interested in. Because our subjects this week are, broadly speaking, all of the people in the U.S., at least, who built that, because we don't have quite as much granular detail on their counterparts in the Soviet Union. You can generally assume a version of everything we're talking about this week happened over there, too, right? Like, they didn't not create a planetary killing doomsday device.
Yeah.
We both just kind of built one that was heavily based on our game theory understanding of how the other side would respond in like an escalating nuclear scenario. And the end result of that was both countries were ready perpetually and are still today ready at all times to wipe out more or less all of human civilization, but in roughly 15 to 30 minutes. That's about how long it would take.
Do you ever think about quantum immortality? Sorry, I'm just going to go straight into wingnut shit.
That's a nice thing to think about. It's comforting, at least, the idea that like we'll never experience the worst case scenario because our consciousness doesn't persist in those moments.
Except that is, and I think about that specifically around nuclear destruction because I think about how often the people of the generation ahead of mine are like. They almost seem silly how worried they were about nuclear apocalypse because it didn't happen during the Cold War. So we're like, oh, obviously humanity would never do that. But it would be impossible for me to be alive now if the world had been destroyed. So even if 9 times out of 10 we destroyed the world, we're stuck being alive in the one out of 10. So it actually makes me more fearful because I'm like, well, it might just be pure raw luck that we didn't annihilate ourselves.
Unfortunately, I think that is, if you're trying to look at this from an educated and accurate perspective, that is the only reason we're all alive. Because we nearly wiped out, the number of times that the whole world nearly got wiped out in atomic hellfire is like, you have too many to count on all of our fingers and toes in this podcast combined, right?
Oh, God.
It happens so many times. And the amount of resistance whenever someone pointed out, oh, hey, the way this was built could kill us all at any moment accidentally. That happened so many times. We'll be talking about the fucking Minutemen missiles and how they were initially set up. But what's interesting about this week is that our subjects are kind of like Schrodinger's bastards, where some of these guys do have big body counts, especially the folks who were, responsible for getting like Leslie Groves, right? Who was the general who oversaw the Manhattan Project, right? You can put a lot of deaths under his name. But most of the people who built this system never killed anybody, even indirectly, really. But they could at any moment. Guys, in fact, guys whose last bit of work was in the 60s could 15 minutes from now, if the right things had started happening 15 minutes ago or a couple of seconds ago, 15 minutes from now, all of these guys could become the biggest murderers in world history, right?
But they won't be remembered.
But they won't. No one will be. Nothing will be, right? That's the beauty of atomic hellfire.
History is written by the victors, and there's no victors.
There's going to be no victors of a nuclear war. Simply no history written. But they are interesting in that because a lot of them are not like bad, and some of them are even deeply sympathetic. There's a guy we're going to talk about who may have saved all of human life, but also still did help build the machine that could at any moment end it all, right? Because and I need to correct this from the start, all of this is still relevant because absolutely nothing has been done to make this system safer since the end of the Cold War. And in fact, it's significantly more dangerous than it was at the end of the Cold War, in part because Russia's no longer pretending to not be in a launch on warn situation, which is where both Russia and the United States are today, is launch on warn, which means that the policy of both governments is to start shooting everything they have when they have a credible warning that they're being nuked, right? And our best case scenario would be like, one crazy country like North Korea decides to fire a single ICBM at the United States, but that would still trigger a massive nuclear response. And if for some reason we couldn't get in touch with the Russian government, and as a heads up, there have been times where we've been out of touch with them for as much as 48 hours when there's been like critical things to like that happens. The gaps in comms like that, especially since Ukraine happened. And if we started launching missiles, the way that most of our missiles would work, a lot of them would go through or at least appear to be going towards Russian airspace or Chinese airspace for a while. And none of these radar systems are perfect. So there's a very good chance, even if we didn't have it set up to cross Russian or Chinese airspace, they would think that for a period of time that is longer than the amount of time they know they have to choose to launch their arsenals in response, as per the way deterrence theory works. This could happen at any moment. This could have started happening seconds ago, right? So that's what we're talking about this week, is how we got to this point that we have not ever stepped back from. We are just as close as we were during the Cold War. That's very important for people to understand. So these next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about how this all came to be, right? Because all of the men we're talking about this week, most of whom, again, have no body count and probably lived otherwise decent lives, all of these guys put the work in to make this machine, knowing that they were building a system that, if used, would lead to planetary genocide. And they built it anyway. They built it because they knew it would work that way, right? So we're going to talk about why. We're going to talk about, because they thought they were doing the morally right thing. And up until now, you could make a case, up until the missiles fly, you could continue making a case that it was the right thing to do, which is one of the fucked up things about it, right?
Right.
So this is a complicated topic, but I do think these people are worth discussing, in part because these are all people who sat down and had conversations about, like, okay, we do this and that'll kill about 600 million people. Yeah, build it, you know? Like, these are the talks that they were having. There's a joke that gets made online today a lot, a meme about a tech company building the Torment Nexus, an imitation of classic sci-fi novel Don't Create the Torment Nexus. It's kind of a joke about the way a lot of tech projects feel now, where it's like, this is exactly what the sci-fi that inspired you was warning against, right? But that really is the reality of the atom bomb. And this is not something I knew until I read the book Command and Control by Eric Schlosser, which is one of several books that I used as sources for these episodes. And at the start of his book, Schlosser points out that the first person to conceive directly of an atomic bomb was H.G. Wells, who wrote a 1914 novel titled The World Set Free. I was not aware of. Now, there's some other candidates, but this is like the first. I'll tell you why this is, I think, the best candidate for like the first guy to imagine a semi-accurate conception of an atomic bomb. In it, Wells puts together a story that is weirdly like the backstory of the Federation in Star Trek. Scientists create the ultimate explosive, a radioactive bomb that allowed someone to carry in a purse or suitcase, quote, an amount of latent energy sufficient to wreck half a city. As Schlosser writes, these atomic bombs threaten the survival of mankind, as every nation seeks to obtain them and use them before being attacked. Millions die, the world's great capitals are destroyed, and civilization nears collapse. But the novel ends on an optimistic note, as fear of a nuclear apocalypse leads to the establishment of world government. And this is Wells. The catastrophe of the atomic bombs which shook men out of cities, shook them also out of their old established habits of thought, Wells wrote, full of hope. And yeah, I think that's fascinating. I didn't know any of that.
He was really into wargaming.
He would have been so into Warhammer if he was alive.
He genuinely was into wargaming.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
Yeah. Him as Warhammer man. I like that idea.
He would have been also another big wargaming nerd who would have been into Warhammer was the guy who played Grand Moff Tarkin, early Napoleonic wargamer. Anyway.
Hell yeah.
Wells's nukes didn't work quite like the real things. They went off slowly and they let off huge amounts of radiation over years of time. But Wells came pretty close to foreseeing that the real thing, close enough to foreseeing the real thing that in 1929, a Hungarian physicist named Leo Szilard, Szilard, met with Wells to try and purchase the literary rights to publish his novel in Central Europe. This is relevant in terms of like who was the closest to a nuke, because Leo Szilard is one of the fathers of the atom bomb. A decade or so after trying to buy the rights to this, he comes to the U.S. and he becomes one of the architects of the Manhattan Project. And he's a guy, you can't really blame Szilard, right? Again, if we're talking about where does the moral blame lay,
sure,
he has the most understandable reason for wanting to help the U.S. build a nuke of anybody. And it's kind of good to talk about him because it does make the point that it's a little unfair to judge these men without talking about the circumstances in the world that formed them. Szilard was a Jewish refugee. He fled Nazi Germany and he wound up in the United States. Because he was a physicist, and because he was a refugee of the Holocaust, he knew not only the threat that fascism represented, but he knew that Hitler had a bomb program going.
Yeah.
And in 1939, he sends a letter to Albert Einstein laying out his fears. And Einstein's
this is the guy who sent the letter.
To Einstein. And then Einstein helps him write a letter to FDR.
Sorry. Yeah, please, yeah.
But and then they send out Einstein helps him craft this letter and he sends it to FDR. And this letter warns about bombs of a new type. And FDR takes the warning seriously that he keeps exploring the idea, which helps lead to the establishment of the Manhattan Project in 1942. Like that's Leo Szilard, and he ties directly back to the Wells idea.
That's awful. That's so the fact that we can like literally say not only don't build the Torment Nexus, but maybe don't write the Torment Nexus.
Maybe don't write about the Torment Nexus. I mean, I think Szilard probably was into Wells because he people had theorized before Wells that something like an atom bomb might be feasible, unlike the physicists had. And I think Szilard was impressed that Wells had gotten something so close, and also he clearly wanted to warn the world about this thing, which I think is why he was interested in purchasing the rights to this. And we'll talk a little bit more about him later, but it is so tragic because you can't blame him. Like his attitude is like we need to have this because Hitler might have it, right?
Yeah.
Which maybe I don't know, but that's the same logic that and the USSR is not Nazi Germany. Obviously, the proof of that is as simple as what happened in the Cold War, right? And to be fair, neither is the United States. Neither country used the damn things on the scale that would have ended civilization,
right?
We'll talk about Hiroshima and Nagasaki too, but it's you understand like Szilard's motivations are deeply sympathetic, right? And a number of scientists behind the Manhattan Project, some of them are refugees, right? But the ones that aren't still get into it because they're reading the news. They're aware of how dangerous the US's enemies are during World War II. And it's a legitimate threat that Germany in particular might get the bomb before we do, right? And those stories are like half the reason this happened, because a lot of people of goodwill got involved with the Manhattan Project because they were like, well, this is probably the lesser, it's probably better that the U.S. has this than that a fascist country is the only one with a nuke, right?
Right.
Like that's their logic here. And they had to operate on, we know that the Nazis were never going to get a nuke, right? Just based on the choice, because they didn't, right? They went in different directions. They did not make the choices ultimately that would have given them.
Have you heard this thing? Maybe it's in the script, or maybe I'm like wrong about this. Mm-hmm. That there was a work slowdown of the Nazi bomb program, where they were like, and they went and they tried to tell their U.S. counterparts, like, "Hey, we're slowing down this bomb. You all need to slow it down too." But the person that they told didn't believe them and was like, "Oh shit, they're trying to lie to us. They must be like right about to build this bomb." Have you heard this story?
No, I haven't actually. No, it's not.
I can never remember the name of the book because I found it in a trash can 20 years ago. It was about the social history of building of the bomb. And I read this and it like changed the way that I was perceiving this stuff. But I've since read more about this and researched more about this, and I think it's like messier than that. But I think again, just from memory, that there was like a work slowdown in the Nazi program because it was all of these physicists who used to work with Jews, because before all the Jews got kicked out of the physicist programs. I don't know if that's true or not.
Neither do I. So check on that.
I want to believe.
Yeah, I mean, there's some stories like, I mean, and espionage is heavily baked into the whole story of how this all happened, right?
Yeah.
And it's the spies in the U.S. who bring bomb information to the USSR are people working on a similar logic to Szilard, where they're like, well, the U.S. is obviously not a good actor, and if they're the only ones with a nuke, they're going to kill everyone in the Soviet Union, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, and maybe, we talked about it. Plenty of guys talked about it. We had a plan to do it, so you're not, and maybe by the way, if it's arguable that building this doomsday device stopped a war that would have killed hundreds of millions and was ultimately the right thing to do, and a lot of people argue that to this day, then it was certainly morally right for scientists to leak information to the Soviet Union, because otherwise the US would have killed 600 or so million people.
Right.
Right? We know that because we talked about doing it a lot.
And you were really right with the Schrodinger's bastards.
Yeah, exactly.
These people are heroes or bastards, and we will never know. And in half the timelines, they're one, and in half they're the other.
I guess part of why I'm doing this is that if this happens, 15 minutes after you finish listening to this podcast, you'll know who to be angry at in your last couple seconds of consciousness, assuming you're not near ground zero for one of these things.
Yeah.
And you probably want to be at ground zero. It's the least painful option available. The road is optimistic in terms of the aftermath of thermonuclear war on a planetary scale. Anyway, so those guys with that logic, basically, that this is a messy thing. I don't really want to be building a giant bomb, but it might save a lot of lives in the long run. That's like a sizable chunk of the Manhattan Project, right? That's like a big amount of the logic behind the reason individual people got involved, right? The other half, though, is and this is largely on the military side of things. It's not exclusively military thinkers, but this is how the military thinks of these weapons, both when we're starting to plan one and then immediately after we start using them, right? And the military logic for why building this system, why getting as many of these things as possible is a good idea, is based on a military theory that starts to take hold after the end of the First World War. And this is ultimately the theory that leads us to the system of international mutually assured destruction that we live in today, right? And there's an element of historical rhyming here, that we build this literal global doomsday device as a result of a theory that takes off in the end of World War I based on what happened in World War I, because World War I is itself the result of a doomsday device going off, a device that was never supposed to go off, and a device that a lot of people, if you, right up until the start of World War I, if you talked about this system of alliances and military buildup, right, and an arms buildup, that you've got all these munitions refit schedules and whatnot, and interlocking alliances, was meant to ensure that there wasn't going to be a colossal European war, right? That was the people who would defend it, would say that if everyone's really well armed, and if everybody's always, and if we have all these alliances between different powers that make it an unwinnable situation, we won't have this war, right? People would make that argument, Now, obviously, the technology at the time, they didn't have access to ICBMs and nuclear submarines, so they had to make do with defensive alliances that promised one country would enter a theoretical war on another's behalf. And these do work like a machine, right? And that is what happens. You have Austria declares war on Serbia. That brings France and Germany into it. The German plan that they had built meant that the only way we can possibly win this war is we have to do this specific kind of invasion that takes us through Belgium. That brings Great Britain into the, and so on and so forth.
Right. And they have the Maxim gun.
And they've got everyone's got a version of the Maxim gun, and everyone's also thinking, well, I just refurbished and upgraded our artillery. And France has just upgraded this thing, but they haven't upgraded this thing. And if we go now, they won't have the new version of this thing, and ours will still be that's a big part of the thinking too, right? And this is always the case, and it had been for decades prior to World War I. And prior to World War I, the fact that it would be so costly and it was so, like, everyone's plan for victory rested on so many like assumptions and was sketchy enough, no one really wanted to do this, right? I mean, with the exception of the military thinkers who had spent their entire lives building and planning out this system of like, this is how we're going to activate our troops. This is the order at which we'll get them marching, and this is where they'll move in. They really, so you have this mix of nobody on the civilian side of governance wants to think about this seriously because it would be a calamity, and they know it. And everyone in the military is thinking about it constantly. So the instant you start having leaders need to make a decision as to whether or not they're going to go to war, the loudest voice in their ear is this general who's thought of nothing else his entire professional life. And by the way, in the 6 minutes a U.S. president would have to decide whether or not to launch the nukes, the loudest voice in his ear is going to be a guy who thinks about using the nukes nonstop.
Yeah, it's like his job.
It's his job.
This is like the whole like an armed society is a polite society logical fallacy.
Yeah.
Like it's just so interesting that it's this writ large where we have data that shows that an armed society is not a polite society.
It sure isn't.
I'm pro Second Amendment for complicated reasons, but
very complicated.
But like, it's just not. It's like you could watch all the videos of people being like, "You parked in my space," and now they're shooting at each other.
Yeah,
and they would have been punching each other in a different world.
Yes, like, and it's one of those things. I've literally had the exact situation of like, I had a situation that would have been violent, but we all had guns and knew it, and so nobody started shit.
Right.
And I'm also more than aware of the fact that, like, the United States is more violent than a lot of unarmed societies, right?
Yeah, because if you carry a gun, you have to have an entirely different mindset where you kind of
changes everything. Yeah.
You actually can't stand up for yourself. You kind of have to take possibly even the first punch, right?
Yeah.
You have to do everything possible,
literally everything to avoid
including
violence.
Taking a couple hits.
Yeah.
Because you know that you're capable of an overwhelming capacity of violence.
Yeah.
And people don't do that. Instead, they're like, isn't this sick? I've got overwhelming capacity of violence.
And that's one of the worries with like the nukes is when they go from, because one thing I will say, and this is something I'll even give Nixon, basically all of our leaders and all of the Soviet leaders, right? It's a mistake to leave them out too. This is the thing that would only have worked if both sides were similar. For all of the flaws of all of the men running both countries, the duration of the Cold War, all of them had one thing in common, which is they were guys who were like, no, that would be fucked up.
Yeah.
No, that'd be fucked up. We're just not going to do that.
Yeah.
Right? There's some great, fucking Reagan has some really good quotes of like, where he's like having this conscience of like, I can't believe we as human beings created this nightmare system. Yeah. This is so much worse than I ever knew it was. Yeah. What's wrong with people? Reagan had those moments, right?
Because he wants to punch people.
Yeah.
He wants that.
Yeah. He's a puncher,
wants to
maybe.
Do the lower level of violence. Like,
and there's a good JFK quote when this all got explained to him for the first, because JFK, one of the things he did is he took away the military's control of the nukes, right? Mm-hmm. And made it, because the military used to basically, theoretically could have made the call to launch the missiles without presidential authority.
Goddamn.
It wasn't mechanically necessary the way it is now, right? Like the way the code system works now, you mechanically have to have the president looped in, right? Mm-hmm. Although we'll talk about that. It's not a perfect system either. But that became the way we do it during JFK's administration. And when all of this got explained to him, how this works, I think his exact quote was like, "Can we call ourselves the human race? Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Are you fucking kidding me?"
Yeah.
And they all you get a lot of reactions like that from presidents. And that's the only reason we're all alive to this day. And that's the thing, not just with the US and Russia, but with any country that gets a nuclear power, is maybe you get someone at the head of that country who can think about that and who can think about for whom it's not an unthinkable, right? And that changes everybody's calculus to a startling degree, right? This is why a lot of people, there's a good book called Nuclear War by Annie Jacobson that lays all of this out in a pretty unsparing term. And she provides like a theoretical, and her theoretical is North Korea's Mad King launches missiles for unclear reasons, right? And what I don't like about it is I don't really agree with the whole the Kim family are like crazy thing. I think they're pretty rational actors. I just don't think they're thinking about the same things that other countries are entirely.
Yeah, their backs are to the wall. Like, I'm not trying to apologize for them, but
I see a logic in what they're doing. I don't think they're crazy, right?
Yeah.
And I don't. What I think is, I don't think his book is as good, but there was another book that came out a year or two previously by another person who is like a scholar interested in the nuclear mutually assured destruction system. That was also a North Korea-U.S. exchange hypothetical, but that didn't rely on North Korea being crazy. In fact, everyone was performing logically, right? It like basically the premise was North Korea does something that kills some South Korean civilians, right? I think they either shoot or they fire a missile and it hits, which has happened before, right? North Korea has in fact killed South Korean civilians not all that long ago, right? And as a result, the North Korean president, without seeking U.S. approval, fires missiles at military targets, non-nuclear missiles at military targets in North Korea. But the leader of North Korea doesn't know that the U.S. didn't approve of the firing of missiles, and their system can't entirely tell what's incoming and what's not. And they see once South Korea fires missiles into North Korea, the U.S. starts raising its alert level, and North Korea becomes aware. And anyway, it's this whole. Right. It's this whole cycle of escalation that doesn't require anyone being crazy. It just requires, and by the way, one of the things we found out very recently is that the currently imprisoned former president of South Korea, who is being charged with, I believe, insurrection at the moment, actually did send drones into North Korea illegally without getting U.S. approval or anything while he was president as part of some boondoggle to basically get to declare martial law, right? So, this stuff, like, shit like that happens all the time and just hasn't escalated. But, like, we have had the first couple stages of a few different apocalypses occur. This is not crazy, and it doesn't require any power, Russia, the United States, North Korea with nukes, to be like a mustache-twirling madman. It just requires them to all have incomplete, imperfect information and focused on their own survival, right?
Yeah.
It's good. I love this stuff.
I'm like, while you're talking, I'm thinking about all the other countries that also have nukes and like their own things going on.
Right.
Like,
you
know, like, I mean, Israel and North Korea are like comparable entities in my mind in terms of being like small powers that are like pariah states that probably aren't going to do something to get themselves, like, I actually could see personally, I could see a big state feeling more confident to do it, you know, but
anyway, we'll keep talking about this, Margaret, but first, here's some ads. We're back. So we got off on a little bit of a tangent, but I wanted to get back to a point I was making, which is the historical rhyming between the system, like the mutually assured destruction, is a product of a military theory that gets born at this theory of strategic bombing that gets born at the end of World War I, right? And that theory only exists because World War I happens, and World War I is the result of a doomsday device that wasn't supposed to going off, right? You have all these like treaties and stuff that basically guarantee that if one of a couple of different powers goes to war against basically anyone around them, it will start a chain reaction that leads to a general European war, right? And because of the way that armies work in this period, right? And all military wisdom at this point is based on the last war, as it always is. And the last war for Europe is the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871. That's not literally the last conflict in Europe during this period, but it's the last big one that people are generally concerned with when they're making their predictions like this.
Well, Germany versus France is the only way to have a European war, as far as I can tell. So,
oh man, I mean, we have not had a good European war since those two got their shit together, and that's why I think we should start tweaking them both. You know, just start see who we can make angrier at the other. You know, Germany, I hear France has been talking hella shit. You know,
just set the Rhine
maybe
on
invade
fire.
A little bit. Yeah, set the Rhine on fire. Fuck it, let's see what happens. Only France has nukes, so we should be fine. Anyway. The great land powers of Europe, namely France, Russia, Germany, and to a lesser extent Austro-Hungary, knew that the instant war was declared, there was this clock ticking, right? Because most of your army is reserves, right? The largest amount of manpower you have isn't your active duty. It's this mass of like reserve troops, these guys who, when they're 18 or whatever, They're basically drafted. They sometimes serve like a year, and then for a period of time, they have to do. It's basically they're all in the National Guard, right? That's the norm in most of these states. You have some version of that, and so it takes a period of time to call these guys up from civilian life, to issue them their gear, to get them moved into their units, and then to get them moved to the front. So everyone is working, not only do you have this interlocking series of alliances, but once war starts, every side knows I have to be able to get my reserves ready for active duty before the enemy can. Otherwise, they're going to invade before I have my army, which means I have a ticket. Once the Archduke of Austria-Hungary is assassinated and then people start to realize that general European war is in play, it's not just a matter of diplomatically can we smooth this. It's all of my generals are shouting that, like, if we don't mobilize now, we don't know that France isn't mobilizing, right? We can't tell. They might be mobilizing. And if they're mobilizing, we only have this period of time to start mobilizing in turn, right? That's a big part of everybody's thinking here. And that's the same with nuclear war, right? Where you don't know entirely what the other side is doing. We, the US, have pretty good data on when people are, because we have this nuts, insane level of spy satellites and shit like that. Although all of it has errors, all of it has things that can go wrong, right? None of it's perfect.
Soon AI will run it. It'll be fine.
Yeah. So everyone's acting off of imperfect information, and everybody has a very limited time frame, and they're being shouted at by their generals that if we don't move in time, we're fucked, right? The whole country could be fucked, and you have X amount of time. Now, it's days and weeks, in the case of these European monarchs, right? But that's still a ticking clock, right? Anyway, we all know how World War I goes. Not great.
Badly for everyone.
European power is seriously hobbled worldwide. And basically one of the things that's fascinating to me, and this is the case in a lot of wars, everyone's planning at the start of World War I is based on how the last war had gone, and everyone's planning is wrong. Germany's plan to knock France out of the war in the first couple of months doesn't work. France and Russia have this plan where we'll both hit Germany on either side, right? If Germany starts some shit, we'll come in on both flanks and we'll be able to knock out their ability to prosecute the war pretty quickly. Doesn't work that way. Great Britain has this fairly small, really highly trained army that they're like, well, we can insert this into the continent if something brushes up and it'll probably be fine, right? And they realize, oh no, actually you have to have actually millions of guys with guns, How fast can we draft all the coal miners? All of these, and Germany or Great Britain's plans are based in part on we've got this great navy. That's probably all we'll need, right?
Yeah, and they have a Tolkien.
And they got J.R.R. Tolkien somewhere in there, Surely we'll be okay. Anyway, everyone's plans are basically wrong at the start of the war, and it leads to disaster. And so after the carnage, a bunch of military leaders around the world started studying what had happened to try to make predictions about what would happen in the next war, which is the same thing that did happen after 1871, and they made the wrong predictions. But they're sure this time we'll get it right. We're smarter than that last generation of military thinkers. We'll make conclusions from the last war that are right, Mm-hmm. And one of these guys, among the most influential of these fuckers, is an Italian general named Giulio Douhet. Now, he had been born in Caserta, Italy in 1869, but his family were refugees from Savoy, which was a former Italian possession that had been ceded to the perfidious French. As a young man, he'd attended a military academy and became an artillery officer in the Italian army. He continued his formal education by studying engineering at a university in Turin. Douhet rose steadily through the ranks, and by the early 1900s, he was a member of the Italian General Staff. Basically, they're joint chiefs, right? That's kind of the idea. He had been an early advocate for dirigibles, initially used as spotters for artillery and the like. And once the first aircraft started taking off, he became an immediate advocate for aircraft as a weapon system, right? Now, this on its own isn't noteworthy. He was right. Obviously, aircraft are pretty important in modern war.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, it wasn't universal. There were certainly some guys being like, no, the infantryman with a rifle will always be the core of any warfighting effort. We don't need planes. There were some nuts. But most intelligent people were like, obviously, planes are going to be useful, Being able to have the sky seems helpful in the event of a conflict. And Douhet, but one thing that did make him noteworthy, where he was kind of seeing far ahead, was that he suggested air power shouldn't entirely be the purview of ground commanders, right? It would effectively need to be its own kind of service, And this is something, even during World War II, there's not an Air Force in the U.S. We have the Army Air Corps, right? It's a part of the Army. Douhet ahead of time is like, no, the air power should be its own independent branch. It's different enough, right? It's like the Navy. In 1911, he got a chance to act on some of his theories when Italy went to war in Libya against the Ottomans, because an awful lot of Italians had never really gotten over the Roman Empire. That's the gist of why we keep fucking with Ethiopia. Douhet's conclusion from this was, and this was like the first real world use of air combat power for Italy, and his conclusion is that in the future, planes will get better and high altitude bombing will become the number one battlefield role of planes, right? This is not true for World War II entirely. I mean, it's debatable, right? But there's a lot of argument that's not entirely, that high altitude bombing was not the number one battlefield use of air power.
Yeah, wasn't high altitude bombing more bombing
civilian targets,
civilians, but
right?
ideally
close air support is less high altitude because you can't do it as accurately, right? Yeah. Like you need to be closer to not hit your own guys as much. This is one of those things, technology has made this kind of true because like even a lot of what we'd call close air support today is still pretty high altitude because you can fire a missile from pretty high altitude, right? Like modern weapon systems, you can shoot from higher up, but he's wrong in spirit, right? Which is that like this is not the way most effective combat use of air power in World War II is not high altitude bombing, right? And even if you look in the Pacific theater, right, like it's a lot of naval aviation being used to knock out other ships, but it's not really high altitude bombing. You know, Pearl Harbor isn't high altitude bombing, right? Yeah. It's a different kind of use of aircraft. But Douhet is certain that high altitude bombing is going to be like almost not just like critical, but basically the only thing that air power will be used for, right? And he is so certain of this that he becomes kind of an asshole about it, right? Like he illegally orders the construction of bombers without getting like approval to actually spend the money, and it burns out his career. He gets forced into the infantry, and he spends the early stages of World War I basically screaming that Italy can win. We can break this deadlock, you know, in the mountains and make the enemy harmless if we can just gain command of the air. And he calls for the construction of 500 bombers to drop 125 tons of bombs on Austria daily in order to break the stalemate of trench warfare. Now, so this is the kind of thing, it seems ahead of its time, right? Because this is sort of where military thinking went, right? Like it was certainly the way military thinkers were thinking in World War II because of Douhet, but it's not correct ahead of its time. In part, like Italy simply couldn't have built 500 high-altitude bombers to drop that kind of tonnage on Austria daily. They did not have the capacity. Like the Italian industry, the Italian military, in the middle of World War I was not going to be able to do that, right? It's just not a realistic ask of the country.
Yeah, they're busy not getting slaughtered in the war already.
Yeah, they don't have the spare resources, and also bombers aren't that good yet, right? Like they will be by World War II, but Douhet is not saying this is what, I mean, he will eventually say this is how the future should work, but he is also arguing we should be trying to do this right now. And Italy just doesn't have the resources or technical know-how to create the bomber fleet he wants in 1915, when he's shouting about it to everybody who will listen. And he is such an asshole about this that he is imprisoned for a year for not shutting up about how, because he's calling his superiors incompetent for not following through with this impossible plan. Like,
yeah, and you don't get away with that during a war.
No, they lock him up for a while, but he keeps writing about his ideas while he's in jail. And the war gets worse and worse for Italy, and he's eventually brought back and given command of the Aviation Bureau, which shows you how desperate Italy is. After the end of hostilities, he starts work on his magnum opus, a manifesto on the future of strategic air power. In 1921, it was published under the title The Command of the Air. Now, some of his arguments are pretty strong, right? One of the things he's saying is that, like, look at what happened in this fucking First World War. It was a shit show. Bomber aircraft aren't blocked by trenches, right? You can get right over them. You can hit targets behind the trenches, like their artillery, right? And you could maybe knock infantry out of trenches. Now, this is actually something, one of the things he'll be proved wrong on, that is that infantry and trenches are a lot less vulnerable to aerial bombing than everybody wants them to be, right? Turns out trenches are pretty good at protecting people, especially with the kind of technology they're going to have by World War II. It's better than just shelling them endlessly, but it is not the get out of trench free card that Douhet pretends it is, right? Now, Douhet he's one of a number of growing military theorists who had learned from the last war that these huge conscript armies that everybody has moved towards, like, if that's how war works, if the whole male civilian population is potentially part of the military and the whole country is being mobilized to support the military, then you can't limit yourself to just striking troops in the field in future wars. Civilian populations, Douhet's attitude is civilian populations make continued resistance possible, and thus civilians participating in the infrastructure of war must be attacked. Right?
Yep.
Oops.
It's funny. Whenever there are these things that are technologically developed that I just would have assumed are older, like I would have just assumed somehow that like bombing civilian populations is somehow older than this as a tactic,
It is. Like this, Douhet is not the first military leader to be like civilians are valid. This, in fact, is the norm in a lot of ancient warfare, right?
Yeah.
Like fucking a lot of times in ancient Greece, one city-state goes to war against another, the one that loses does not get to keep being a city-state. You annihilate them, right?
Yeah.
You kill the men, you rape the women, right? Like that's not every war, but a lot of wars in classical history go that way. So
I've been reading that for my show recently, and I suddenly had to realize I was like, oh, the concept of surrender is sort of new. It's so a new technology. You actually let people go home after you beat them.
It's more that it had stopped being the norm to consider the whole country to be enemies. But even during World War I, right? Great Britain starves 1 million Germans to death by blocking ports. Germany, we know they can't grow. They don't have the ability to produce sufficient foodstuffs on their own. That's part of the military effort, right? It's not as direct as bombing civilians, but it would be very inaccurate to pretend Douhet is the first guy who is like, civilians are on the table, right?
No, totally. But to specifically the idea of this type of bombing.
Yeah, exactly. It's meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I think that is important, that he is the guy writing in a book. This is a logical strategy for how modern war ought to be pursued, is the systematic destruction of civilian populations through strategic bombing, right?
Yeah.
It does matter that he's the first guy to write that out. Like that's upon his soul.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is not to say that nobody would have thought to do stuff like this if he hadn't been around, right?
No, but I mean, just because someone else will invent the torment nexus is not a reason to invent the torment nexus.
And no, nor does it erase your culpability in making it. Now, one of my sources for this episode is an article by Colonel Everest Riccioni, who's one of the more influential pilots in U.S. combat aviation history. He's an interesting guy. He was a key member of what became known as the Fighter Mafia, which is a group of guys in the Air Force who argue, and this is in like the latter half of the 20th century, they argue that the branch's bureaucracy was corrupt and lying about this is like right before the birth of, I think, the F-16. They're saying the Air Force bureaucracy is corrupt and it's lying about how well certain weapon systems work for corrupt reasons. And as a result, they have all these complaints about hybrid role fighters as opposed to dedicated anti-aircraft fighters. There's a lot of debate as to whether or not the fighter mafia was right. I'm just bringing this up because this is a guy who has a history of being on controversial sides of arguments, right?
Okay.
And he wrote an interesting article about the history of strategic bombing for the Air Force, right? Where he is kind of laying out his thinking as to why Douhet was wrong. And he summarizes Douhet's arguments this way. He also believed that air forces would dominate surface forces on land and at sea, and that an enemy's ability to sustain a war could be eliminated. He preached the destruction of enemy air power in the air and on the ground. The need is not only to kill the enemy's eagles, but also to destroy their eggs and their nests, Douhet wrote. Enemy aircraft production plants were defined as prime strategic targets. He believed that bomber attacks were inevitable, and that defenses against them were useless. He believed that attacking populations with relatively small amounts of explosives, incendiary, and gas weapons would make populations force their leaders to sue for peace. He believed that a powerful strategic bombing force could deter potential enemies from attacking. Now, a lot of this is the way very influential people in military planning still think to this day. Douhet's thinking is incredibly common, or at least descendants of Douhet's thinking is incredibly common within military planners to this day. And this is the root of mutually assured destruction. It starts with these ideas, right? Particularly the idea,
that people won't put up with it from their leaders.
That people won't put up with it, that you can, and that a powerful strategic bombing force can deter an attack, right?
Right. Okay.
Because they can't be stopped. You can't stop a bombing run, right? It's impossible. Part of his attitude is that the sky is too big, right? You can't actually stop bombers from getting to where they're going to go. So if you have a powerful enough bombing fleet, like, no one will attack you because they know they're doomed in that instance, right?
Yeah.
And this is basically how we think about near-peer nuclear warfare to this day, right? And that knowledge deters those sort of wars. So this is part of why people will argue Douhet wound up being right, even though he did not foresee nuclear weapons, right? In any way, shape, or form. And
right, he was wrong about bombers, but
right.
He was right for now about nukes.
Well, this is kind of the theme of our episodes, is that a lot of people buy into Douhet's theories and base their careers in the Air Force on believing that this is more or less right. And once nukes come around, that's the thing that makes that the things they had already believed true, and is part of why they become such advocates for nuclear warfare, right? Now, I want to really emphasize how wrong Douhet is here, because he is not making grand predictions about the distant future, nor is he theorizing about 21st century nuclear warfare or even late 20th century warfare. He is discussing the war he expected to break out in the next 20 years or so. And on basically every technical point, Douhet was desperately wrong. Again, he argues the sky is so big that air power should only be offensive, because air power cannot defend territory. And the only way to protect the homeland is to build an air force that can bomb the enemy into the ground before your opponent can do the same. He makes really specific predictions, arguing in 1928 that dropping a payload of just 300 tons of bombs over a capital city in under a month would be enough to end a war. This would all be proven catastrophically wrong. But for the later period of his life, Douhet is effectively the first air power influencer. His book doesn't sell quickly at first, but it becomes the Bible of how to make an air force for basically all of the men who were in charge of the air forces in World War II. Like, on every side, he's super influential. And that's not entirely accurate. He has his detractors, obviously, but he's massively influential. And I'm sure Douhet would have been thrilled to have had such an influence, because everyone in World War II tries out his ideas, but he never gets a chance to see that. Shortly after Benito Mussolini makes him the Italian chief of aviation, he dies of a heart attack in 1930. So, by the way, ends his life as a fascist, too. Yeah.
Couldn't have happened to a worse guy.
You know who else died of a heart attack in 1930 after being made the fascist minister of aviation by Benito Mussolini?
His twin brother?
Yeah, sure. Or these sponsors. I don't know. And we're back. That was an awkward ad pivot. I'm not going to lie, Margaret. I'm not going to lie. But I think the audience will forgive us.
I think they will. I think they'll be able to find it in their heart attack to do it.
Yeah.
That's actually, what I'm trying to do is make you feel better by making a terrible joke so that people have already forgotten about your bad ad pivot.
Thank you, Margaret. Let's continue talking about this guy's stupid ideas about how planes work, right?
300 bombs. 300 pounds of bombs.
Yeah, 300 tons of bombs. All you need. That'll wipe out any city's will to fight. So German war planners, influenced by Douhet, built a bomber fleet that was tailored for the attack, not operations on enemy cities, but providing close support to their advancing infantry and armor. And you could call this an adaptation of some of Douhet, certainly influenced by it. This idea that, air power should just be for the offense, right? Mm-hmm. That's its primary purpose. And so it's kind of an adaptation, right? England also, Douhet's attitudes have a lot of influence on how the Royal Air Force is constructed in the interwar period. And England spends a lot of resources creating a bomber command that was meant to deter German action on the continent without requiring another painful mass conscription for British kids, That does not exactly work out. Here's how Colonel Riccioni describes what happened next. Germany then turned to the invasion of England, and its first test of Douhet's theories. The Battle of Britain was engaged to gain air superiority for Operation Sea Lion. Britain's bomber command had failed to deter the war and the attacks on England, but Germany's bomber fleets also failed to bring England to its knees. The Luftwaffe tried to gain air superiority over England. The initially frail fighter force of the Royal Air Force, under the competent command of Air Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding and using the nascent technology of radar, was able to inflict unacceptable losses on the German bombers and their fighter escorts. After the Battle of Britain was won by England, Hitler turned his aerial weapons on London to bring the population to its knees. Churchill cheered quietly. The bombing only stiffened the morale of Londoners and brought England's war effort to a higher pitch.
Yeah.
So, from the start, Douhet is proven wrong. just immediately.
On
right?
both counts about.
Yes. Yeah. The having a big bomber fleet does not deter enemy action. Also, you can defend from a bombing attack, and aircraft are great on the defense. Having fighters to intercept bombers works really fucking well.
It's funny because, like, this is Europe medieval warfare was a big part of medieval Europe, right? And, like, the development of armor, until you get to guns.
Yeah.
It's like,
really
it's the development of armor that is the new technology that's changing shit. You put a fucking armored knight against anybody, and they're just like, you kind of can't do anything unless you get a dagger to my throat, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is the same. It takes place over a longer period or over a shorter period of time with air power because shit moves faster now, right? Yeah. But it is it's the Red Queen hypothesis, right? Like everyone is constantly moving as fast as they can just to stay in place, you know? Like you build up this great bomber fleet just in time to get attacked by a bomber fleet of your own and realize actually we probably should have had more fighters. that might have been handier at the jump, right?
Yeah.
But also the Germans are learning all you need is a bunch of bombers. We've got a bunch of bombers. Oh shit, fighter aircraft really fuck up bombers. Oh no, all our pilots are gone.
Who'd have thought Mussolini would have named a guy who wasn't actually as good at things as he said he was?
Who'd have thought the Italian fascist minister of aviation was wrong about some important points, right? Now, one of the things that is important for what will come next is it is true air power is great on the defensive, and it's actually very possible to interdict and damage bombers before they can hit their targets, but not a single group of bombers on any side during the war is turned back, right, entirely without being able to drop any bombs. That doesn't happen, which for nuclear planning, this is, again, one of these things nuclear warfare retroactively makes Douhet correct on, is that, like, well, once you've got nukes, if you have 1,000 bombers flying towards London with conventional bombs, then yeah, fighters can kill a bunch of those bombers and do enough damage that it renders, like, you know, the Germans will drop some bombs in response, but you can make it be more costly for the Germans than it is for Great Britain.
Right.
If 1,000 bombers each have a nuke, you're not stopping every nuke from hitting, and all they need is one.
Right.
Right? That is an important point about, this is another lesson that's being learned, right? At the same time as we're learning how wrong Douhet is, once the nukes come into the picture, people are going to be looking at this data and seeing something different, which is that you can't stop a nuclear attack of sufficient size, even before ICBMs. Yeah.
Yeah, the scale of destructiveness of a nuke is just so different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to really emphasize the wrongness that Douhet was, because, again, he said that about 300 tons of explosives in a month dropped over an enemy capital would be enough to break any people's will to fight. During a single night during the Battle of Britain, May 10th to May 11th, 1941, Germany dropped more than 700 tons of high explosives on London, as well as 86,000 incendiary devices. England kept fighting.
Yeah, no, they came up with a whole catchy slogan about it.
Yeah.
Everyone pulled together. You have socialists like Orwell, like organizing in the Home Guard.
Yeah, a lot of people felt better. Which is a fun story. But yeah, we like, it
gives us punk rock that people grew up out of that.
Sure. Yeah. But yeah, that is an important point. Again, just how wrong Douhet is. Like, yeah, we took more than twice as much as he said would break any city in a month and a night. London did, and people don't break under bombing. You know, which is also going to influence nuclear thinkers, because then the attitude becomes, well, you just have to kill all of them then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So despite the fact that Douhet is right out the gate proven wrong, war planners on the Allied side continue to give a great deal of credence to his now badly marred theories. One advocate was Sir Arthur Harris, also known as Bomber Harris, who became head of the RAF's Bomber Command. He was a huge advocate of area bombing. Precision bombing, which is another thing people are, the strategic bombing side also breaks down to a couple of broad schools. And as is always the case, most people are a little, some from column A, some from column B, but you've got area bombing and precision bombing, right? And the idea behind precision bombing is that you can hit just the target you want. That is like the factory making bombs or the factory making planes, right? Or a barracks, and not hit the high-rise apartment structure near it. Now, precision bombing is a lie, right? It's not all that true today, but it's especially a lie in World War II, right? It's a lot. Now you can kind of do it, although it never works as well as planners like to claim it does. But in World War II, it's just a fantasy, right? And so there's a lot of that gives a lot more push to people like Bomber Harris, who are like, well, fuck precision bombing. Just saturate an area with bombing, right? You accept greater civilian casualties so that you can cripple their industrial capabilities, right? That's the public argument. In private, they're saying something different, but the public argument is that this is just the way it has to work. The first area bombings by the RAF on German cities was in 1941, in 1942, and they did not work very well, right? They're spun as wins, but on an actual strategic level, they're not huge hits. They cause some shock to the German citizenry, but they don't accomplish the stated goal, which is to damage war production, right? And the RAF suffers high casualties because German air defenses are excellent. You know, Douhet continues to be very wrong about air defense. It is possible. I mean, in Vietnam, North Vietnam, part of why the war goes the way it does is that North Vietnam has excellent, very advanced air defenses, right? Yeah. This is something that gets lost in the whole. It was just some farmers in the jungle that beat the U.S. No, they had an army. Yeah. they had radar guided missiles and everything, you know? When Arthur Harris took over bomber command for Great Britain, he immediately organized a much bigger area bombing campaign, Operation Millennium. On May 30th of 1942, nearly 1,100 Allied bombers hit Cologne, annihilating some 600 acres of the city and rendering 100,000 people homeless. Harris declared the raid a success. The British press did too, but they focused on the destruction of war industry, not the civilian cost. And this frustrated Harris, in part because it was inaccurate. While dozens of factories had been damaged or destroyed, the city only lost the equivalent of a month's war production. The real cost to Germany, as Bomber Harris saw it, was human. Here's how he later described the purpose of Bomber Command, in his eyes. The aim is the destruction of German cities, the killing of German workers, and the disruption of civilized community life throughout Germany. It should be emphasized that the destruction of houses, public utilities, transport, and lives, the creation of a refugee problem on an unprecedented scale, and the breakdown of morale both at home and on the battlefronts by the fear of extended and intensified bombing are acceptable and intended aims of our bombing policy. They are not byproducts of attempts to hit factories.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it also does the same stealing the reserve. Like I've met someone whose family, I think it was Cologne. I just did the asshole thing where I've been to a city, so I'm like, let me use the whatever. But it's like I've met someone who was like, oh yeah, my whole family was like staunch anti-Nazis, and then 80% of the family was wiped out in one night by a bombing, and then they all joined the army. And I'm like, yeah, they still joined the Nazi army, so fuck them. But like, also, like, man, I couldn't tell you that anyone I've ever met would do anything different.
That's just how people work when their family gets killed in a bombing. They get pissed. They're not their best selves, you know?
Exactly.
That's just how people be, homie. I don't know what to tell you. They don't like having their families killed by bombs. And there's, as we'll talk about, a lot of debate as to the influence of strategic bombing on the German civilian population. But what we can say is that it's not why they lose. However, whatever it does to morale doesn't end the war, you know? So Bomber Harris is wrong in his primary attitude, right? As to like what would work to actually end the war. And he never gets called on that because we win the war anyway. And everyone kind of thinks, fuck those guys, low key, high key. But, fuck them. But it doesn't work. That is important. Now, there's not agreement, and in fact, a lot of conflict between the U.S. and Great Britain over this strategy initially. The guys in the U.S. Army Air Command do not all agree with Harris. And in fact, we keep conducting, the Brits are doing nighttime raids, which allows you to lose the least aircraft while killing the most civilians or killing the most people. We do daytime raids for a long time, which are way more dangerous because the idea is it gives the civilians more of a chance to get away. Right? That's part of why you're doing it. It's more honorable, basically, right? Which it is, but it also means you lose a lot more guys, right? Like, it's way more dangerous.
Yeah.
It's a very admirable thing, I think, that we're doing for a while. We're not always going to be that way. This debate really starts to erupt after this point. And on one hand, you've got these area bombing, strategic bombing advocates saying like, I know it hasn't quite worked yet, right? Like, we haven't knocked Germany out of the fight. They're not giving up yet. But if we just get more bombers, bro, it'll work, right?
Yeah.
And on the other side, and again, a lot of people do kind of wind up in the middle here, but the other side broadly are like, well, close air support is what's most important, right? Air power's primary use is its ability to augment conventional forces in taking and holding territory, right? And
it
close
is very
air
good
support
at that, right?
works really well, right?
Yeah.
It had proved to be tantalizingly potent in North Africa, and guys in the US like General Pete Quesada were bullish about its potential in a future invasion of France. An early test for the strategic bombing advocates, on the other hand, came prior to the invasion of Sicily. There's this island called Pantelleria, which is garrisoned with about 11,000 Italian troops that we need to take before we invade Sicily and then invade Italy. And I'm going to quote from an article in National Interest by James Stevenson here. The bombing of Pantelleria became an experiment, one anticipated to demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt that bombing would ratify what up to then had been a matter of faith, but would soon offer proof through bombing alone surrender was a certainty. All these forces were assembled to test the assertion that if you destroy what a man has and remove the possibility of his bringing more in, then in due course of time it becomes impossible for him to defend himself, Major General Jimmy Doolittle said. If bombing alone did not force a surrender, the Allies planned to invade the island by June 11th. In an attempt to avoid the need for an invasion, the Allies generated 5,284 sorties, dropping a total of 12.4 million pounds of bombs on Pantelleria.
Jesus.
Did it work? Kinda. After a month of unopposed round-the-clock bombing, the Italians surrendered after Allied ground troops had approached the island, right? They didn't surrender on their own from the bombing. They surrendered before ground troops came in. Now, you could still say, but that still worked, right? However, there's a couple of other issues. For one, Italian defenses were remarkably intact still, given the force deployed against them, because nearly every bomb missed. The B-17s were most accurate with a 22% hit rate. That's defined as landing a bomb within 100 yards of its target. So the B-17s hit 22% of the time, and that's our best bomber.
And that's within a football field. Yeah,
and that's still within a football field. Yeah. And our medium bombers hit rate is about 6%. Now, this is a problem because we had been claiming very different things about the accuracy of our bombs. Back at the start of 1943, we'd had something called the Casablanca Conference, in which Winston Churchill sat down with the 8th Air Force Commander, Ira Eaker, who promised the British Prime Minister that the B-17 flying fortress, with its fancy we had these things called the Nordon bombsight, which was like, this is the shit, this makes precision bombing possible. It's like it's like a little computerized bombing system that we can do things with bombs we never could do before. You can drop a bomb from 25,000 feet and hit a target the size of a pickle barrel, right? That's the promise Ira Eaker makes Winston Churchill when he's like,
holy shit.
They're sitting down, he's like, we can hit a pickle barrel at 25,000 feet. Now, in combat, a few months later, these things would hit within a football field, only 22% of the time.
Yeah.
So you're getting this. This is going to be also a theme with all of the nuke stuff that the Air Force builds. They will make all these claims about, yes, it's this accurate and it's this safe and it can only be activated if this and this and this happens. So it could never be accidentally fired. And they're like, oh wait, but what if this thing happens that happens every day? Oh yeah, that could accidentally launch all of our missiles. Yeah. Are you guys going to fix it? We actually don't want to. That's the story of the Minuteman in a nutshell, but we'll talk more about that later. Right. Anyway, with a fleet of these, Eaker promised, we can disembowel the German Reich and destroy its industrial capacity with no need for ground forces, right? We can just gut the Reich entirely through precision bombing. Now, Churchill has some direct experience with aerial warfare, and he does not believe Eaker, right? He doesn't believe him about the accuracy. And the other thing that Ira Eaker is saying is, we don't need fighter escorts for our B-17s because they have all these guns on them. That'll be enough to deter attack. We can just send the bombers in alone.
Fortress part?
Yeah, that's basically the idea behind that title. But because these B-17s are surrounded in machine guns, fighters won't be able to, if they attack us, they won't be able to penetrate. And that's necessary because the bombers can fly a lot further than the fighters. So what Eaker is saying is we can send these bombers into the heart of enemy territory. We don't need to worry about the range of the fighters, and they'll be fine. And he's going to be wrong about that too. So one result of the Casablanca conference is that the Allies put together a list of military assets they want to prioritize destroying or disabling, a task that would overwhelmingly fall on air power. These included submarine bases, train lines, fuel storage, aircraft production facilities, and other crucial war industry sites. One of the first of these targets was a ball bearing production facility in Regensburg. Ball bearings were critical for constructing aircraft and a number of other important military vehicles. Operation Double Strike was launched by Major General Eaker's 8th Army Air Force on August 17, 1943. 376 bombers plowed deep into German territory, beyond the range of any fighters to escort them. Per the website Codenames Operations of World War II, the mission inflicted heavy damage on the Regensburg target, but only at catastrophic loss to the force, and as much as 60 bombers were lost and many more damaged beyond economical repair. As a result, the 8th Air Force was incapable of immediately following Double Strike with a second attack that might have seriously crippled German industry. When Schweinfurt, that's the industrial facility, was attacked again 2 months later, the lack of long-range fighter escorts still had not been addressed and losses were even higher. As a consequence, the U.S. deep penetration strategic bombing effort was curtailed for 5 months.
Could you imagine going on a thing where you're like, well, last time we did this, about 1 in 6 of us died. Anyway, so we didn't change anything.
Are
so
we
let's
doing
just go
anything
do
different?
it.
Yeah. Are we doing anything new?
Yeah.
No, same plan, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk to anyone who saw heavy combat and they have stories like that where it's like, well, this went really badly, so we're just doing the same thing, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is how armies work. Now, this was a double failure, not just for Eaker, but for Douhet's theories. Once again, the vastness of the sky didn't stop a defending military from inflicting severe casualties on a bomber fleet. And that despite the damage done to the Regensburg plant, German industrial capabilities were not seriously harmed. As Reich Minister of Supply Albert Speer stated after the war, no plane or tank failed to be built for lack of ball bearings. As Colonel... Yeah, it just didn't work. Colonel Riccioni noted in his article, the Allies failed in their choice of a target because they hadn't learned their intelligence was bad. Germany was importing ball bearings from Sweden and Switzerland by this point, and it also they had foreseen this and stockpiled pre-war. They had also redesigned a bunch of aircraft and shit to not need as many ball bearings.
This was for like a Home Alone style plan they had. That was actually, the stockpile was unrelated.
It was, they were dropping it down the stairs.
Yeah.
Did horrible damage to the Third Army. Yeah.
Yeah.
Riccioni writes, this was a failure both in target definition and target priority. Worse, because it was vulnerable, the 8th Air Force had become the target. Now, over in England, Arthur Harris never accepted the primary contentions of the advocates of precision strategic bombing. In October of 1943, not long after Regensburg, he stated, "The aim is destruction of German cities, the killing of German workers, and the disruption of civilized community life throughout Germany. It should be emphasized that the destruction of houses, public utilities, transport, and lives, the creation of a refugee problem on an unprecedented scale, and the breakdown of morale both at home and at the battlefronts by fear of extended and intensified bombing are acceptable and intended aims of our bombing policy. They are not byproducts of attempts to hit factories."
Yeah.
Bomber Harris, one thing you have to give him, he's very clear. No. This is about killing women and children and rendering them homeless. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
That's the business the RAF is in. You guys need to stop pretending that you're fucking with ball bearings.
I mean, there's an honesty to that I respect.
Yes. The man knows what he's about. It's killing civilians, but he's about it.
Yeah. He has made his peace with whatever he believes, and he thinks that this is the lesser evil is by doing a lot of evil, and by doing
a lot of evil quickly. Right.
Yeah.
A little before the Regensburg attack, Bomber Harris had launched a nighttime raid on Hamburg. It was the opposite of a precise attempt to destroy a specific target. Incendiaries created a firestorm that swept through the downtown area, incinerating roughly 40,000 civilians. This is like, and this is this becomes a theory, right? Like, there's a theory put into practice, but there had been this theory that by dropping incendiaries in the right place in a certain parts of a city, you can create these firestorms that massively amplify the damage of your bombing campaign, right? And this is like when it really works for the first time. This is going to be a massive part of our strategy in when we're bombing the Japanese home islands, right? Is creating these hideous firestorms. And this becomes, like, I think the term is literally like bonus damage, basically. This is like a concept of nuclear war, too, is a big part of the appeal of nuclear weapons to the people planning to use them is that you create these firestorms the size of states. And like, that's really handy. It really amplifies the amount of a country you can destroy when you create firestorms that wipe out thousands of miles of terrain.
So it has never occurred to me until this moment that the phrase firestorm, I'm aware that firestorms happen in wildfires. Mm-hmm. It has never really actually occurred to me until this moment that people artificially create them. And that's where a firestorm, like, a firestorm to purify if you're into shitty hardcore music.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Yep. I mean, I think most people have learned the term firestorm from Command and Conquer Tiberian Sun. Firestorm, obviously. The Tiberian Sun expansion pack that was pretty good.
Yeah.
But some people learned it from history, I'm sure.
I learned it from a shitty hardcore band. So
you learned it from a hardcore band. I learned it from Command and Conquer. Yeah. In November of 1943 and March of 1944, there were vast raids on Berlin, which left much of the capital in ruins. And yet, German morale continued to hold. This is the thing. Bomber Harris, he's more honest, but what he's saying will happen still doesn't happen.
Yeah, he's wrong.
No amount of bombing causes Germany to give up. By the time the war in Europe enters its endgame, there were very mixed conclusions to draw from the actual efficacy of strategic bombing and precision bombing. Both ideologies had suffered failures, and both had claimed successes, although some of those were dubious claims of success. Months earlier, Bomber Harris had considered strategic bombing the same as opening a new front. Summarized in a write-up for the Juno Beach Center, quote, until D-Day, he was convinced that bombings, if they were destructive enough, could force Germany into submission without the Allied casualties that were bound to result from a massive landing operation in continental Europe. And in part 2, we're going to talk about what happens next. We'll get to Japan finally, and we'll start talking about the nukes. But this is all necessary. These are the foundational assumptions of the people who build the doomsday device that we all live under right now. Like, this second, an incident could have started, maybe just because a radar station was wrong, that will in 15 to 30 minutes result in the annihilation of all organized life, human life on the planet. That could have happened as I say this sentence. And we mostly won't know until the bombs fall. And there's really nothing, like, one thing that maybe will comfort you is that none of the facilities we have to protect our government will work. Like, none of them are sufficient for the tonnage, the megatonnage of explosives coming at them. That little, this is a good thing about Jacobson's book, Nuclear War. One thing she points out is there's bunkers underneath the Pentagon and the White House. Everyone will bake to death slowly as if they're in an oven. Like, we know what kind of forces will be deployed against DC. There's no surviving in those bunkers. It's a much worse death than the people topside will have.
Well, that's good.
That's good. Anyway, maybe that'll cheer you up as we roll out of part 1.
I appreciate this idea of, I hadn't put together this idea that World War I, the powder keg was intentional.
Yeah.
That it was this mutually assured destruction concept, and seeing the through line is fascinating.
It wasn't as direct because it did kind of, a lot of this started to, this evolved accidentally out of stuff that had existed before. It was not constructed as consciously as Nuclear M.A.D.
Right.
But it was something people were conscious of. People talked about it. That's a reason why so many historians have discussed the system of alliances and military armament schedules and the different arming schedules for reserves as a doomsday device, right? Because it worked that way.
Yeah.
And it is really relevant to discuss that in the context of the doomsday device that we all live under right now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
All right, everybody.
Hack Pie, do you want to plug anything?
You got a plug?
Oh, well, if you respond to the possible imminent destruction of all things by retreating a little bit into escapism, you could listen to me and Robert and some of our friends play Pathfinder, where we're just pretending to be people in a fantasy world.
If you don't know what Pathfinder is, it's a tabletop game thing.
Yeah.
Much in the vein of Dungeons and Dragons or a number of other games.
Just legally distinct.
Yeah.
And if you like weird history, I have a podcast called Cool People Who Did Cool Stuff with a totally original, the format. Robert, you got to try this format. What I do is I research a topic every week, okay? Mm-hmm. And then I get a guest who doesn't know as much about that topic, but sometimes knows kind of related things around that topic. Mm-hmm. and then I tell them what I've learned.
That seems like the newest idea in podcasting.
Yeah.
Is there a producer named Sophie there that doesn't say very much but sometimes talks a lot?
That doesn't
you should
sound
actually,
possible.
Robert, you should use that part too. Get a producer named Sophie.
I'll see. I'll think about it, Margaret.
Okay.
I'll think about it.
But but don't take my name. You have a decent name for Behind the Bastards. Mine's cool people who did cool stuff.
Okay. Cool people who did cool stuff. Check out us playing Pathfinder on It Could Happen Here's book club. And remember, if there is a nuclear war, all of the people who got us into it will also die unthinkable deaths. So,
yay.
I don't know, try to live near the center of a city and just, say the things to your loved ones that you need to say.
Yeah, tell your friends you love you.
Tell your friends you love them.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.